Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another session. We are going to be now discussing how to be deploying smart solutions for free to cities and opportunities for entrepreneurs. We do have our Salim, who's going to be moderating this wonderful session. He's the CEO of Quantella Inc. Prior to joining Quantella, Salim served as corporate vice president for Cisco's global public sector. Over to you, Amar.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. As you heard earlier, my name is Amr Salim, and I'm the CEO of Quantella. Quantella is a technology company. We are focused on delivering value by digitizing infrastructure and services in cities around the world. Before joining Quantella, I was with Cisco for 14 years, where I led the public sector business worldwide as a vice president. And before that, I led the smart cities and IoT business at Cisco from incubation. I'm quite familiar with the smart cities topic and have had exposure to the industry for more than 10 years. I've always been in technology throughout my career in Fortune 100 companies like Compaq, HP, and Digital Equipment before that. I live in Dubai, and that's what I'm speaking to you from right now. I don't usually take my dogs to conferences, but if you hear my dogs in the background, it's because I'm at my house. Um, Before we start and dive into our subject today, I would like us first to get to a baseline understanding of what we mean by smart cities and smart projects or smart initiatives or smart solutions. Smart cities and initiatives are not about technology. They're about the people and citizens that live in the cities. It's technology is only an enabler that would allow the cities to achieve what they need to deliver to their citizens. And since it's about the citizens, what people really care about is quality of life in the city, which is impacted by the quality of social services they receive, the environmental aspects like air and water quality, and their financial well-being as citizens. Smart cities projects are about digitizing municipal physical services to create better efficiencies and generate value to their citizens. But cities usually struggle to find the starting point for these initiatives. And now more than ever, cities are struggling to find the budgets to implement these projects in the middle of the pandemic while having to redirect budgets and funds to dealing with pandemic issues for crisis management and also for the stimulus packages. So budgets are essential, but at the same time, when they're not there, the smart solutions that are required are still needed to deliver the services and to create efficiencies. When we talk about in this session, we're gonna look at the outcomes. What outcomes could we get out of smart solutions, which can be converted to economic value that's necessary to finance the capital needed to implement these smart solutions. Let me start first by introducing my panel. I'm fortunate today to be joined with three excellent panelists with very diverse backgrounds who will be able to share very different perspectives on this topic. First, I welcome Alice Charles. Alice leads the city's work stream and the real estate industry at the World Economic Forum. She's also a member of the European Commission Intelligent Cities Advisory Board, a member of the United Nations Habitat Stakeholder Advisory Group, a member of the Commission for Innovation and Inclusive Growth for the City of Belfast, a member of the Mayor's Global Council for the City of Buenos Aires, a member of the Visiting Committee of the Sensible City Lab, MIT, and a member of the Urban Leadership Council for the Coalition for Urban Transitions. She has 19 years experience working in the areas of cities, urban development, town planning, real estate, infrastructure, environment, climate change, and public policy globally. Alice has a master's in global leadership through the World Economic Forum. Welcome, Alice. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
I also welcome Vasa Babik. Vasa is a partner at Digital Alpha, an investment fund which specializes in digital infrastructure, next generation networks, cloud, smart cities, IoT, and which has a commercial partnership with Cisco. Vasa has 30 years experience in finance and technology, including roles leading investments for large tech companies, as a partner in a turnaround private equity fund, as a group director of Vodafone, and as a partner in strategy consulting. He's based in London and has an MA in economics from King's College, Cambridge. Vasa, Great to have you with us. Thanks for joining. Also, I would like to welcome Vernon Turner. Vernon is the Principal and Chief Strategist of Causeway Connections, a strategic ICT advisory and consulting company. He's globally recognized expert in the traditional ICT market research. Vernon extended that capability to include emerging technologies and new business models basing the roots of the Internet of Things and sensor-based data. He has a strong CIO-supported background in technology requirements, particularly in small cities, smart manufacturing, sustainability, transportation, finance, and banking communities. Vernon sat on the IoT World Forum Steering Committee and was also on the committee created by the governor of the state of Illinois for its Smart State Initiative. Vernon, thank you for joining us. We appreciate having you with us today.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So before I give the floor to our panelists, who each will have a few minutes to introduce their perspective on the topic, I first would like to set the scene on what we mean by outcomes. Cities officials do not aim to buy technology, but they aim to achieve specific objectives to the benefit of their constituents. These objectives are to reduce costs, reduce energy consumption, increase revenues, or save lives. That's what we mean by outcomes. If we deploy a smart solution which will deliver energy savings and subsequently cost savings, this is the economic value that we can derive to finance the capital needed to deploy the technology. So instead of charging the city upfront for the smart solution or technology that they will acquire, we would finance the project and share the savings on costs with the city to recover our investment. Obviously, some outcomes are harder to quantify, but there are ways also to address this, which we will discuss in this session a little bit later. I will now ask my panel to give us a 5 to 7 minute perspective on the topic, and then we'll exchange questions and answers. So if anybody has questions, please send them over to us. And if I start with Alice, please, can you kick us off?
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I think in terms of when we think about outcomes, what are the outcomes we want to deliver? There's outcomes for citizens, but there's also outcomes in terms of operate your services more efficiently within the city. So, particularly now, one of the things that cities need to think about is how they virtually deliver services in a world where we're also delivering all kinds of services virtually. And I suppose the first thing to say is that when a city thinks of outcomes, there's a variety of different outcomes they need to think of right throughout the urban value chain. And, that's from planning, urban planning, through to design, through to the delivery of infrastructure and services, through to the monitoring and operation of infrastructure and services. And in terms of outcomes, if we think about some of the outcomes and some of the types of applications that are being delivered to correspond to that, in terms of urban planning, one of the things that cities want to do is to be able to build models that enable them to create long-term strategies for their cities. So they know that if you're going to think about delivering infrastructure within the city, you need a long-term vision to first of all, get the confidence of investors to want to invest in infrastructure in the city, but also to get engagement from citizens and help citizens understand what they need for their city. So, what we are seeing now, for example, is the rollout of digital twin technology or 3D models for cities, which are able to run different types of scenarios. So the overall piece is around building a strategy that citizens understand and investors understand to transform a city. I guess another sort of outcome that cities are often focused on is how can we ensure that we are engaging all of the citizens in our society in whatever vision we're building for our city. So in that sense, they are developing applications that allow for citizen collaboration. And, very recently, for example, the city of Amsterdam, during the COVID-19 crisis, would have developed a sort of speaker's corner, if you like, for citizens to allow them to still engage in democratically in decision-making within the city and have their voice heard. So, you're seeing that kind of application. Then there's more standard outcomes that cities are trying to achieve that we all hear about. So, at the moment, cities are very focused on a green and just recovery. So that requires action in relation to mobility, in relation to energy, in relation to buildings. So in relation to energy, they're trying to decarbonize the grid infrastructure, for example, within a city. And that requires the digitalization of the electricity grid infrastructure within the city. Equally, real estate owners who own buildings within the city are trying to operate those buildings in a more smart and efficient way, but they're also thinking about how can we monitor those buildings for health and wellness. So again, they're using IoT technology, for example, to monitor energy use within a building, but to also monitor things like air quality, to see how healthy or otherwise the building is. So there's a variety of different outcomes that cities are trying to achieve. They're also, for example, trying to embrace the circular economy and reduce the amount of waste that they have in their city and seek to upcycle and recycle instead. So again, they can use technology applications to monitor the amounts of waste that are in the city, to inform collection routes, for example, of waste within the city. So there's a variety of different outcomes that cities are trying to achieve, which inform the digital applications that they have. But I guess just to say, and we probably will come on to this a little bit later, if a city is serious about using technology as an enabler of delivering infrastructure and services in a more smart and efficient way, they need the leadership, they need the expertise within the city that's able to cut across silos to develop holistic solutions. And they also need to think about innovative ways of financing such digital technology in a resource-constrained world that we now live in. So I'll leave it there and pass the floor to the next person.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Alice. I have a lot of questions for you, so we're going to come back to this in a minute. Vasa, what's your perspective?
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Alice. So let me start with my perspective as a citizen, and then talk about my perspective as a finance person and the role that my firm tries to play in the landscape that Alice just described. I think you used the words, Alice, there's a variety of outcomes. And I think that's the key starting point to understanding how to get the benefit of these solutions for cities and their citizens. It's mapping out the full variety of outcomes that are available. And I think what I find interesting is when I began to do this work a number of years ago, how there are also sort of second order outcomes that you don't expect, which are beneficial. So if I take the example, if someone had asked me when I first began this kind of work about smart lighting, my first guess would have been, oh, easy, replace legacy sodium lighting, high pressure lighting, whatever, with modern LED lighting, the kind of example that one has from one's own home. The power consumption is lower with LED, so there's a big saving. And there is indeed a big saving, but it's in the order of 20 or 30% purely on a like for like. And then you think, okay, what else can be done? And you realize there are smart lighting solutions. And I speak now because I'm on the board of a company called Simcon Lighting, which is a great smart lighting and street pole city solution business. That it's not just like for like replacement. If you're going to have a modern lighting solution, you don't have to set fixed times where every light in the city goes on to its maximum power and a fixed time when it comes off again. You can adjust and dim and turn lighting on and off according to environmental patterns. If it's an overcast night, the lights come on earlier. If it's a bright night, they come on later. Dimming according to usage patterns when there is pedestrians on the line. So just having that level of control can actually, in my understanding, double the amount of savings you achieve. And then you think, okay, that's fine. That's optimizing all the energy savings. The extent to which maintenance savings are material to the total benefit is really interesting when you implement a smart lighting solution that can also deliver monitoring and oversight of the entire lighting network. Because not only can you then provide the controls, you can also understand when a citizen calls to say, hey, the street lights at the end of my road don't work, I don't feel safe, please repair them. You can actually send the right truck at the right time to exactly the right street pole, and there's sometimes ambiguity or the records aren't complete or whatever, and it can have exactly the right tools and spares to perform the repair that's needed. And just the number of truck rolls that you can save through such a solution is really material. So understanding the full set of outcomes and the variety of outcomes, I think, is really important. And I picked on smart lighting because that's an area I happen to know well. I think the next thing is to understand the full variety of solutions that might be relevant to a city, because you can always pick one and install it, deliver it, that's fine. And if it happens to be, whether it's lighting or parking management or waste management or pollution monitoring, a city can always pick a solution and deploy. But there is benefits in having something more systematic that addresses a wider variety of outcome. And there's sometimes a disadvantage of doing these things, as little spiky piecemeal projects. Now, being able to pull together and integrate a variety of solutions, I think brings a whole host of second order benefits. That kind of integration is something that Amma's business Quantella really specializes in. As a finance person, the reason that kind of blending of solutions and blending of a variety of outcomes together has an advantage is because it allows more scope for the economics to be there to be able to finance it. And that ends up being quite powerful. Because if I now come to the substance of what we do, the challenge in securing the outcomes that you talked about, Alice, is that there is merit clearly in these solutions. So there are positive outcomes that cities seek. That's the demand side in my mind. There are clearly supply side enablers. You can, if you're a city, deploy any of the things that we've talked about or we'll talk about, and you can get it done even in the current challenging times, probably within months. So there is supply, there is demand. What is the challenge? The economic and structural challenge is this is all new. City infrastructures, as we look around, have evolved over centuries with ways of procuring, paying, funding them. And no one has ever had a new overlay across a city, which is that of all the smart city solutions. So unsurprisingly, cities aren't sitting around with budgets saying, hey, there is merit in all these solutions. There are suppliers for all these solutions that are reputable and high quality. So let's just go and do it. The challenge is budgets and how do you actually finance that? Cities don't have the P&L budget to put it in place. They don't have necessarily the balance sheet to be able to borrow a lot of money. How do you do it? What we do is work with cities and businesses and leaders like Amma and businesses like Quantella to help find what we call an outcome-based financing structure. Because when there is economic merit and there is a solution, there should be a way to make that work economically. And what we're able to do is to say, if you find a single solution, and ideally a portfolio of solutions that blend and have economic merit, we're able to structure in partnership with your vendor, like Quantella, a financing solution. What do I mean by that? The sources of economic value that can be used to support the deployment of the solution are what we call outcome-based financing. It can be a mix of direct cost savings. So for example, the energy budget would have been X, now it's going to be Y. There is a source of value that can be used to finance that. So the very direct cost savings. They can be indirect cost savings. Maintenance, truck roll, etc., budgets would have been X, now they're going to be Y, therefore we can use there's another economic source. Then there is the revenue-based outcomes. It could be something like parking, where there is an opportunity to say, okay, this is a revenue generating source. If there is a better solution, which is environmentally better and for services better and for traffic flow better, we can divert some of the delta or some of the parking revenue stream to help finance it. Those are the direct ones. And then, perhaps not obviously, there are some quite powerful, more indirect solutions. For example, advertising out of digital outdoor advertising, if you integrate that into solutions, that can provide a quite compelling revenue stream. Or it might be the advertising that's available in public Wi-Fi. If you want to provide a citizen service, free Wi-Fi in a city, there can still be advertising monetization mechanisms. So what we do working with cities and the solution providers is to say, let's shape a solution that delivers all the priorities or the key priorities the city has, and that can be financed by a partner like ourselves who funds the deployment up front and then collects a share of those outcome-based economic streams, whether they're the cost savings or whether they're the revenue generating opportunities. And with a good city counterparty, a good solution, all of the ESG benefits that come behind this, and the sort of 10-year or 10-year plus lifespan of these deals, we're able to, there are investors who are very, very supportive of both those goals and the kind of returns that are available to them. So as you can tell, I find this a very exciting topic, and I suspect I've run over my 7 minutes, Emma. So I hope that's a useful summary for you.
Thanks, Vasa. I like a lot the clarity, and I have also a lot of questions for you we're going to get to in a minute. But let me ask Vernon to also give his perspective before we get into the discussion.
Sure. So thank you very much. And trying to build on what we've heard this morning, let's take a step back and understand what it is that's actually happening in smart cities as we go forward. There's this because of the pandemic, we're starting to see this belief or trend. Are we moving from suburban, from the urban to the suburban? And as such, are we seeing the need for the shift of services and how we do that? One of the things that I look at and stand back and say, this has to be driven by data. Now, we don't want this to become a technology discussion, but the premise that we have an open data platform is going to enable us to decide whether our citizens are in high-rise tower blocks or are they in suburban countryside, you name it. But the important thing here that I want to share is that when I look at the issues with smart cities and how to monetize this, what I see is that there is too much integration issue and not enough innovation. And when I say that, we're spending an inordinate amount of time and effort trying to figure out how to integrate everything. Now, let me give an example where that integration multiplies itself just in this recent pandemic situation. We need to think about smart cities as coming together as ecosystems of partners, both in the private sector and the public sector. For example, for us to be able to do a really, really good job at COVID-19 pandemic monitoring for our citizens, we need to think about, obviously, the contact tracing, frontline healthcare protection, public place fever detection, virus tracking, quarantine management, and in-hospital patient monitoring, and remote patient monitoring themselves, just to make sure that if people want to live in a city, that's okay. The point I want to make here is that this has to be driven by an ecosystem with data, and in particular, if that data isn't real time. There's no good in talking to us about building systems where we're collecting data and it's static. And I'll give you an example of where that real-time data manifests itself both in things like smart buildings, supply chain logistics, traffic management. Think about the capability that if we know the location and the occupancy of a building, when I say location of people, and I'm trying not to make it sound like we're trying to keep track of everybody, of where they are and what they're doing. But with real-time monitoring of that building, particularly say in the morning or in the evening, if we have that data and we understand how many people are coming and going as part of that location, and then apply machine learning and artificial intelligence, then we can create an output data set for those outcomes that we've talked about so far, so that we can generate those services. And those services, think about this nowadays, those services include ride sharing, those services include food delivery, those services could include, as I say, supply chain delivery mechanisms like those from FedEx and UPS and what have you. So what I'm seeing here is that we need to make this fundamental shift away from thinking, let's do these one-offs, but can we integrate them into an ecosystem as I described with the pandemic solution? And last but not least, can we remove the difficulty of the integration of these pieces by having an open data platform where we're willing to share, and this is where the citizens need to understand, we're not sharing their private data, we're keeping their personal data safe, but able to monetize that data for the private sector to create these services like I described just as a moment ago. So I just want to, the last thing I want to say is that we talked a little bit about energy. I think energy is the top of the pyramid whereby all of this should start. So when we talk about building management and we're going to charge people based on how much they've used in terms of that energy consumption, what happens if we flip it around and say, everything we're going to have is based on your total energy consumption, energy as a service. So if you're in IT, how much did it cost to run those applications? If you're in air conditioning, how much did it cost to run those air conditioners? And turn that into a financial situation as opposed to an IT decision. And you'll find very quickly that chargeback is an interesting way, or cost recovery is an interesting way. But using energy as that top level of saying, how much energy did it actually cost to run the city? You'll find that behaviors and incentives will change rapidly and you'll meet your goals. So I'll take a pause there and pass it back to Amr. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Vern. So Alice, one of the things that I think I'd like your perspective on is public sector policies. These creative business models that we're talking about to finance projects do not necessarily fit very well with the procurement policies in public sector. What do you suggest needs to be considered to overcome the policies challenge? I know it's not a good question.
So maybe I'll start the ball rolling and just say, this morning I happened to be on a call with a mayoral network, and they had just done a survey of more than 100 cities around the world to discuss energy transition. So what we were talking about is how do you integrate the transition of energy, buildings, and mobility? So how do you deliver clean electrification, a digitalized grid, EV infrastructure, and ultra-efficient buildings? And the cities were highlighting their constraints. So one of their critical constraints was capacity. So they lacked the technical expertise in-house to be able to think about how they were going to transition energy, buildings, and mobility within cities. From both a discipline point of view, from a technology point of view, and from a finance point of view. The other thing that they were saying was that, of course, they lacked funding, right? They lacked seed funding to sort of get the ball rolling. And Avasa earlier was talking about lighting, how that's a business model that could be applied for rollouts of many other types of technology. But again, it requires initial seed funding. So they were highlighting that they lack seed funding. So coming back to the point on capacity, where you have a lack of capacity, you obviously have a difficulty in introducing policy that's capable of driving reform. So even in the European Commission, where again, there is this drive to deliver 100 net zero carbon and smart cities by 2030, they also recognize this capacity problem. And they recognize that the multilateral development banks need to work very carefully with the cities across Europe to help them to introduce policies and to structure projects in such a way that they're capable of attracting finance and they will have the right risk profile to attract finance in the future. So I think there's a real lack of capacity. And the interesting thing about that survey was whether they were looking at cities in India, Africa, Europe, or North America, the same capacity constraints were being identified.
So by capacity here, you mean capacity of the talent needed to be able, the resources needed to be able to come up with the right policies to deal with these challenges.
Absolutely. Expertise, in that case, we were talking about transitioning energy, buildings, and mobility within cities. So it was the capacity within those specific disciplines. It was the capacity in relation to technology, because they didn't have the expertise in-house to think about how technology could be an enabler. And it was the capacity in terms of finance as well. How do they attract finance?
Yeah. And actually, that's a good segue to my next point to Vasa, which is you and I have worked on many projects together in the past, and I've learned a lot. But what we also learned is governments, as Alice said, don't necessarily know how to deal with us. They don't know how to structure the deals with us. They don't know how to write contracts to deal with the proposition we're coming up with. When do you think we're going to have maybe, let's say, enough experience to be able to say, this is how this works from a contracting and structuring perspective? And also, not many financing entities like Digital Alpha have the confidence that technology will deliver the results that technology has promised in the business case. In your case, you've taken that leap of faith. So when does the rest of the finance community catch the bus?
Hi, Amma. So two quite different questions. So let me try and address them in turn. My experience is, and Vernon and Alice, you'll see this more broadly than I do, is that no matter how much you might talk about these things being generic, this kind of solution for this kind of topography, etc. Every city's different. It's very situational. It's very situational in terms of the specific priorities, the specific accumulated legacy history of what's been done and what hasn't been done, and to Vernon's comments about resource bandwidths, what the city's able in that point in time able to do. So what we tend to find, Amma, is that we have to craft a solution that suits the situation. And we try and give as much flexibility as we can, but equally on the other side, the city has to understand that the package has to be investable, fundable from the point of view of the other side. You can't say, right, these things have a lot of costs, but there's no outcome-based economics, but they're very good. They need to be blended with something that also provides the economic returns, so that the total solution fits within the financing. I find it very situational. I think in practice, Amma, you talked about, it's not very complex, interestingly enough, because the financing layer is pretty simple. Imagine that the city just said, right, we want to buy this solution. The financing layer adds work out the economic merits, and work out a mechanism that to give a share of that to the financing source. In some experiences, because you're not procuring in the classic way, it might even be simpler, because it's simply saying, well, the city's not paying anything up front. It's just agreeing that this solution will be deployed and the economic outcomes will be shared in the following way. It might even be contractually simpler. So I don't think that the contracting part, if anything, if you get to that point, I think that can make it happen quite quickly. It's having the conversation with the city at the right point in time with the and meeting the right set of priorities to be able to take it forward and having the resources there. What will accelerate that, Amma, to your question, I think is, success breeds success. And once you can point, as we can point to more and more solutions that have met the objectives of cities and are working well, if you don't have to explain it from first principles, but just point to the example, as I know of many examples that you can now point to of things that we've done together, I think that has a positive feedback effect that will work. In terms of when will this kind of thing go mainstream, I suspect everything does over time, but it's years away. And our role as very kind of specialized investors who've created these type of solutions is to keep developing them to make sure they're leading edge. And that's something I think we'll be able to do.
Absolutely. Amir, can I just comment on Alice's point about capacity? And I want to try and dovetail it back to this idea of data and the open data platform, whereby the city's data sources are shareable, and that we move away from the challenge of spending too much time on finding the talent to do the integration. As a consequence, we end up with a long time to value, and it detracts the willingness of the private sector to monetize any services. If we can drive standards from the city's perspective that says, if you want to participate in our city, here's how your data has to be presented to us so that we can attract developers in using skills like machine learning and analytics that can create intelligent outcomes that then have significant value to the customer and the citizens for both the commercial and the private sector. So, Alice brings up this gnarly problem here of capacity, but it really it's a fundamental deterrent for the private sector to get involved and say, how do we actually create a partnership here if we spend forever trying to do the integration, which then results in proof of concepts dying on the vine, people getting frustrated. There's no economic value to be able to be generated from that. So I just want to not downplay the tiny word of capacity in all of this, and what that really drives. From my perspective, it inhibits innovation.
Absolutely. Alice, Vasa, Vernon, first of all, thank you very, very much for joining us today. Your perspectives have been amazing. We've reached the end of our time. And I want to take the opportunity to congratulate you on your successes so far, and ask everybody to reach out to you. I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest way if there are any further questions. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.